In a quiet corner of South Wales, master engraver Christopher Hobbs held his breath as he made the final stroke on a design that would mark the end of an era. The small piece of metal before him wasn't just another coin, it was the last official portrait of Queen Elizabeth II that would ever grace British currency during her lifetime. What he didn't know was that in just months, this seemingly routine commission would become one of the most significant pieces of numismatic history ever created. The weight of 70 years of monarchy, countless coins bearing her image, and the approaching end of the longest reign in British history all rested in that single moment. But the story of this final coin begins not with its creation, but with a secret that the Royal Mint had been keeping for over 2 years, a secret that would change everything about how the world remembered the Queen who had watched over Britain through wars, celebrations, scandals, and transformations that no monarch before her had ever witnessed. The morning mist clung to the Welsh valleys as Christopher Hobbs arrived at the Royal Mint headquarters in Llantrisant. It was March 2022, and the world was still recovering from the pandemic that had changed everything. Inside the fortress-like building that had been producing British currency for over 50 years, a meeting was taking place that would remain classified for months to come. And Jessup, the chief executive of the Royal Mint, sat across from a small group of senior designers and engravers. The room was unusually quiet, even for an institution known for its discretion. On the table lay sketches, photographs, and what appeared to be preliminary coin designs. But these weren't for any ordinary commemorative piece or regular circulation currency. "We need to discuss the memorial coin," Jessup said, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken understanding. Everyone in the room knew what this meant, though none of them wanted to acknowledge it directly. At 95 years old, Queen Elizabeth II was showing signs of age and frailty that could no longer be hidden from those closest to the monarchy's operations. The Royal Mint had been through this before, but not in living memory. The last time they had prepared memorial coins for a reigning monarch was for King George VI in 1952, 70 years earlier. Most of the people in that room had never worked on anything like this. The protocols were dusty, the precedents unclear, and the emotional weight enormous. Christopher Hobbs, the Mint's chief engraver, studied the photographs spread before him. These weren't the official portraits that the public was used to seeing. These were candid shots from recent royal engagements, showing a monarch who had visibly aged but whose eyes still held the same determination that had carried her through 7 decades of service. His task was to create something that honored not just the Queen as she was now, but the Queen as she had always been. The commission was unprecedented in its scope and secrecy. Unlike regular coin designs that went through public consultations and media announcements, this project would remain hidden until the moment it was needed. The team was working under what they internally called the contingency protocol, a set of procedures that had been refined and updated regularly but never actually implemented. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Every line, every detail, every subtle curve would be scrutinized not just by numismatists and collectors, but by a grieving nation and a watching world. This coin would be how millions of people would remember the Queen when she was gone. It would sit in wallets, display cases, and family collections for generations. Children not yet born would hold this coin and ask their parents who the lady on it was. Hobbs had been engraving coins for over 2 decades, but this was different. When he worked on the regular definitive coins that bore the Queen's portrait, he was capturing her as a living, reigning monarch. Those portraits were updated periodically to reflect her aging, but they were always portraits of a woman with work still to do, duties still to fulfill. This memorial coin would be something else entirely, a final statement, a closing chapter, an end. The design process began with extensive research. Hobbs and his team pored over thousands of photographs spanning the Queen's entire life. They studied her coronation portraits from 1953, her Jubilee celebrations, her state visits, her quiet moments with family. They examined how previous memorial coins had been designed, looking at examples from other nations and other eras. They consulted with historians, art experts, and even psychologists who specialized in how visual imagery affected collective memory and grief. The technical challenges were immense. Memorial coins needed to be different from regular currency. They couldn't just be another portrait with different dates or text. They needed to convey finality, respect, and celebration all at once. The imagery had to work at the tiny scale of a coin while still being meaningful to someone viewing it with their naked eye. Every element had to be carefully considered for its symbolic weight and emotional impact. The Royal Mint's workshops hummed with quiet activity as the project took shape. Master craftsmen worked on dies and molds with an unusual sense of reverence. These were people who had spent their careers making money, literally creating the physical currency that millions of people handled every day. But this felt different. Sacred, almost. Security around the project was unlike anything the Mint had implemented before. The designs were kept in a special vault with limited access. Computer files were encrypted and stored on isolated systems. Even the cleaning staff were sworn to additional secrecy agreements. The royal household was kept informed of progress, but even they weren't shown final designs until much later in the process. As spring turned to summer in 2022, the Queen's public appearances became less frequent. Each cancelled engagement, each time she was represented by other family members instead of appearing herself, added urgency to the memorial coin project. The team knew they were racing against time, but they also knew they couldn't rush something this important. The emotional toll on the designers was significant. Many of them had grown up seeing the Queen's face on currency their entire lives. She wasn't just their monarch, she was a constant presence, a symbol of stability that had been there through their childhoods, careers, marriages, and the births of their own children. Creating her memorial coin felt like preparing for the loss of a family member. Hobbs found himself working late into the evenings, adjusting tiny details that most people would never notice but that he knew mattered. The angle of her head, the treatment of her hair, the expression in her eyes, every decision felt monumental. He was creating something that would outlast all of them, something that would carry the memory of Elizabeth II long after everyone who had actually known her was gone. The wider world had no idea what was happening in the workshops of the Royal Mint. Life continued as normal. People went about their daily business, handling coins with the Queen's portrait, never imagining that somewhere in Wales, master craftsmen were preparing the final chapter of her numismatic legacy. By late summer, the first test strikes were being made. These preliminary versions were produced in small quantities on special presses, using precious metals that would never see general circulation. Each test coin was numbered, catalogued, and secured. The team gathered around as the first examples came off the press, examining them under magnifying glasses and special lighting, looking for any imperfections or improvements that could be made. The silence in that room was profound. Here, for the first time, was the physical manifestation of what they had all been working toward. The Queen's final portrait, rendered in precious metal, looked back at them with dignity and grace. It was beautiful, it was respectful, and it was heartbreaking. But, even as they achieved this technical and artistic milestone, everyone involved knew that the true test of their work would come later, when the world would judge not just the coin itself, but what it represented. They were creating history, and history would judge them accordingly. The summer of 2022 brought unprecedented challenges to the Memorial Coin Project. As Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years on the throne, the contrast between the public celebrations and the private preparations at the Royal Mint became increasingly stark. While millions celebrated the Queen's remarkable longevity and service, a small team in Wales worked quietly on the designs that would commemorate her passing. Christopher Hobbs faced his greatest artistic challenge yet. How do you capture 7 decades of service in a portrait that measures just over an inch in diameter? How do you honor a woman who had been photographed more than perhaps any other person in history? How do you create something that feels both timeless and contemporary, something that speaks to her role as a young queen and her dignity as an elderly monarch? The reference materials were overwhelming. The royal photographers had provided access to archives that spanned her entire reign. There were the famous formal portraits by Cecil Beaton and Lord Snowdon, the intimate family photographs, the state occasion images, and the more recent portraits that showed her as she truly was, a woman in her 90s who had never stopped working. Hobbs began with sketches, hundreds of them. Each drawing explored different approaches to capturing the Queen's essence. Some focused on her younger years, emphasizing the hope and determination of a woman who had taken on the crown at just 25. Others portrayed her in her later years, showing the wisdom and experience that came with being Britain's longest reigning monarch. Still others attempted to somehow combine different periods of her life into a single, symbolic representation. The artistic challenges were compounded by technical requirements that most portrait artists never had to consider. Coin designs must work in relief, with features that can be clearly defined when raised from a metal surface. Details that look perfect in a drawing might disappear entirely when translated to a coin. The portrait had to be recognizable even when reduced to the size of a thumbnail, and it had to maintain its dignity whether struck in gold, silver, or base metals. The Royal Mint's archives contained examples of memorial coins from throughout history, and Hobbs studied them all. The memorial coins for Queen Victoria, created after her death in 1901, had established certain conventions. They typically showed the deceased monarch in profile, often looking toward the left, symbolically gazing into the past. They included dates of birth and death, along with Latin inscriptions that emphasized their role and accomplishments. But Elizabeth II was different from any monarch who had come before. She had reigned through the transformation of Britain from an empire to a modern Commonwealth nation. She had seen the country through world wars and Cold Wars, through economic booms and recessions, through social revolutions and technological advances that previous generations could never have imagined. Her memorial coin needed to reflect not just her person, but her era. The design team explored radical departures from traditional memorial coin designs. One proposal featured multiple portraits showing her at different ages. Another incorporated symbols representing the major events of her reign: the moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the digital revolution. A third focused on her role as head of the Commonwealth, featuring imagery that represented the diverse nations she had served. But, as the weeks passed, Hobbs found himself returning repeatedly to a more traditional approach. The Queen herself had always been a traditionalist, someone who understood the power of continuity and stability. Her memorial coin should reflect these values, even while acknowledging the unique circumstances of her reign. The breakthrough came during a late evening session in August 2022. Hobbs was working alone in his studio, surrounded by reference photographs and rejected sketches. Outside, the Welsh countryside was quiet except for the occasional sound of sheep in distant fields. The peace of the moment allowed him to focus entirely on the challenge before him. He picked up a photograph taken during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations earlier that year. It showed the Queen on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, waving to the crowds below. But it was taken from an angle that captured her in profile, and, in that profile, Hobbs could see the entire arc of her life. The shape of her face was still recognizably that of the young woman who had been crowned in 1953, but it carried the dignity and experience of 7 decades of service. This would be the basis for his design. Not the Queen as she had been, nor as she was now, but as she had always been, a constant presence, looking forward with hope and determination. The portrait would show her in profile, facing left in the traditional manner, but the treatment would be modern and respectful. Her hair would be styled as it had been in recent years, acknowledging her age without emphasizing it. Her expression would be serene but alert, reflecting the steady gaze with which she had watched over her realms for so many years. The symbolic elements of the design took shape around this central portrait. The inscription would be simple but powerful: Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. The dates would mark not just her life but her reign, emphasizing her role rather than just her existence. The edge of the coin would feature a pattern derived from the heraldic roses of England, thistles of Scotland, shamrocks of Ireland, and leeks of Wales, representing the unity of the kingdom she had served. As the design took final form, Hobbs found himself working with an intensity he had never experienced before. Every line mattered. Every curve would be scrutinized by millions of people. The weight of creating something that would serve as a lasting memorial to one of history's most significant monarchs was almost overwhelming. The Royal Mint's technical team worked closely with Hobbs to ensure that his artistic vision could be successfully translated into metal. They created computer models of the design, testing how it would look when struck in different metals and at different sizes. They experimented with various surface treatments and edge designs. They even tested how the coin would age, ensuring that the portrait would remain clear and dignified even after years of handling. The security around the project intensified as the design neared completion. The Queen's health had become a subject of increasing speculation in the media, and any leak about memorial preparations could have caused a crisis of confidence or, worse, market panic. The team worked under assumed names when corresponding with outside suppliers. Reference materials were coded rather than labeled. Even the computer files used deliberately misleading names. By September 2022, the design was complete and approved by the highest levels of the Royal Mint's leadership. Test strikes had been successfully completed, and the dies were ready for production should they be needed. The memorial coin existed, waiting in a vault like a letter that hoped never to be delivered. The emotional impact on the design team was profound. They had spent months preparing for something they desperately hoped would not happen anytime soon. They had poured their hearts and skills into creating a beautiful and fitting memorial, while simultaneously hoping their work would remain unused for years to come. Hobbs kept the final sketch of his design in his studio, pinned to a board where he could see it while working on other projects. It served as a reminder of the responsibility that came with his role, and of the history that was unfolding around them all. He had created what might be the last official portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, and that knowledge stayed with him every day. The waiting began. The memorial coin was ready, the procedures were in place, and all that remained was hope that they would not be needed for many years to come. But history had its own timeline, and the world was about to change in ways that none of them could predict. September 8, 2022 began like any other day at the Royal Mint. The morning shift arrived at the usual time, security checks were completed, and the massive presses that created millions of coins each day rumbled to life. But, by early afternoon, everything had changed forever. The first indication that something significant was happening came not through official channels, but through the unusual behavior of senior staff. And Jessup, the chief executive, was seen moving quickly between meetings with a grim expression that everyone recognized but no one wanted to acknowledge. Phones rang constantly in offices that were normally quiet. Security protocols that hadn't been used in years were suddenly activated. Christopher Hobbs was in his studio when his assistant knocked urgently on the door. The message was simple but carried enormous weight: he was needed immediately in the executive offices. As he walked through corridors he had traversed thousands of times before, he knew that the project he had spent months working on was about to transition from preparation to reality. The royal household had contacted the Royal Mint at 2:30 p.m. with news that would change the world. Queen Elizabeth II had died peacefully at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. The woman who had been Britain's monarch for longer than most people could remember was gone. The Second Elizabethan Age had ended, and, with it, an era of British history that would never come again. The Royal Mint's emergency protocols had been refined over decades but never tested in real circumstances. Within minutes of receiving the official notification, a cascade of carefully planned actions began. Secure communications were established with Buckingham Palace, the Bank of England, and the new King Charles III. The Memorial Coin Project, known only by its code name Operation Memoriam, was officially activated. Hobbs found himself in the strange position of having his most important work suddenly become urgently needed. For months, he had been creating something he hoped would remain unused. Now, that same design would soon be in the hands of people around the world, serving as their introduction to the grief and memory that would define the coming weeks. The technical challenges of producing memorial coins at scale were immense. The Royal Mint's regular production lines were designed for efficiency and volume, producing millions of ordinary coins each day. Memorial coins required different materials, different processes, and different quality standards. Every single coin would be examined individually. Each would need to meet standards worthy of a queen's memory. The precious metals required for the memorial coins had been quietly stockpiled over the previous months. Gold from South African mines, silver from Canadian deposits, platinum from sources around the world, all had been acquired through carefully disguised purchases that wouldn't attract attention or speculation. Now, these metals would be transformed into lasting memorials to a monarch who had touched lives across the globe. The first memorial coins were struck at 6:47 p.m. on September 8, less than 4 hours after the Queen's death was announced to the world. The ceremony was simple but profound. Senior mint officials, master craftsmen, and the design team gathered around the press that would create these historic pieces. As the massive machine engaged and the first coin emerged, bearing Christopher Hobbs' portrait of the Queen, there was absolute silence. The coin was perfect. The Queen's profile was clear and dignified, exactly as Hobbs had envisioned it. The inscriptions were crisp, the symbolic elements well-defined, and the overall effect was both beautiful and deeply moving. This small piece of metal somehow captured the essence of a woman who had dedicated her life to service, and who had earned the respect and love of people she would never meet. Production continued through the night. Teams worked in shifts, ensuring that the memorial coins would be available as quickly as possible for a world that was already beginning to mourn. Orders were flooding in from collectors, institutions, and ordinary people who wanted something tangible to help them process their grief and commemorate a life that had touched their own. The international response to the Queen's death was overwhelming. Messages of condolence poured in from world leaders, ordinary citizens, and everyone in between. The memorial coins became a focal point for this grief, a way for people to hold something beautiful and permanent that connected them to the Queen's memory. The Royal Mint's customer service team, usually dealing with routine inquiries about coin collections and damaged currency, suddenly found themselves fielding calls from around the world. People wanted to know how they could obtain memorial coins, when they would be available, and what different options would be offered. The demand far exceeded anything the Mint had prepared for, even with months of planning. Within days, the first memorial coins were being shipped to customers around the world. Each package was handled with special care, recognizing that for many recipients, this would be their most treasured possession, a tangible connection to a monarch who had been a constant presence throughout their lives. The emotional impact of seeing the memorial coins was profound for everyone involved in their creation. Hobbs found himself unexpectedly moved when he held the first production examples. Months of work, preparation, and worry had culminated in something beautiful and fitting. The Queen's final portrait looked back at him with the same dignity and grace she had shown throughout her life. Media coverage of the memorial coins was extensive and universally positive. Numismatic experts praised the artistic quality and emotional resonance of Hobbs' design. Collectors noted the technical excellence of the production. More importantly, ordinary people who had no particular interest in coins found themselves deeply moved by the simple beauty of the Queen's final portrait. The Royal Mint worked around the clock to meet demand while maintaining the quality standards the project required. Additional shifts were added, master craftsmen volunteered for overtime, and every resource was directed toward ensuring that these memorial coins would be worthy of the Queen's memory. The normal commercial considerations that governed regular coin production were set aside in favor of creating something truly exceptional. Letters began arriving at the Mint from people who had received their memorial coins. A grandmother in Scotland wrote about how holding the coin helped her explain to her grandchildren why the Queen's death mattered. A veteran in Australia described how the coin reminded him of the Queen's visit to his unit decades earlier. A young woman in Canada wrote about how the memorial coin helped her understand the connection between her country and the monarchy that had seemed abstract before. The success of the memorial coin project validated months of careful planning and artistic effort. But, more than that, it demonstrated the power of physical objects to help people process grief and maintain memory. In an increasingly digital world, there was something profoundly meaningful about holding a tangible remembrance of someone who had meant so much to so many. As September gave way to October, production of the memorial coins continued at an unprecedented pace. The Royal Mint had never produced anything like this volume of commemorative pieces, and they were doing it while maintaining standards that had to be perfect. There was no room for error when creating the final numismatic tribute to Britain's longest-reigning monarch. The memorial coins became more than just collectibles or keepsakes. They became focal points for reflection and remembrance, conversation starters that helped people share their own memories of the Queen and what her reign had meant to them. In holding these small pieces of metal, people were participating in a collective act of memory that spanned continents and generations. The project that had begun in secrecy and uncertainty had become a triumph of artistic vision, technical execution, and emotional resonance. Christopher Hobbs' portrait of Queen Elizabeth II had achieved what every memorial artist hopes for but few accomplish. It had created a lasting image that helped a grieving world remember and celebrate a life of unprecedented service and dedication. The weeks following Queen Elizabeth II's death transformed the Royal Mint from a quiet manufacturing facility into the center of a global phenomenon. Orders for memorial coins continued to pour in from every corner of the world, creating logistical challenges that no one had anticipated. The Mint's usual production schedule was completely reorganized to prioritize the memorial coins, with regular circulation currency production moved to night shifts and weekends. Christopher Hobbs found himself in an unusual position for a coin engraver. Typically, his work was appreciated by a small community of numismatists and collectors who understood the technical and artistic challenges of coin design. Now, his portrait of Queen Elizabeth II was being discussed in major newspapers, analyzed on television programs, and shared across social media platforms by millions of people who had never paid attention to coin design before. The international response revealed the global reach of Queen Elizabeth II's influence in ways that surprised even those closest to the project. Orders came not just from Commonwealth countries where the Queen had been head of state, but from nations around the world where people felt a personal connection to her memory. A coin collector in Japan ordered a complete set in honor of the Queen's state visit to his country in 1971. A school in Brazil requested coins for their British history curriculum. A retirement home in Germany ordered coins for residents who remembered the Queen's role in rebuilding Europe after World War II. The Royal Mint's production teams worked with unprecedented dedication and precision. Master craftsmen who had been making coins for decades approached this project with a reverence typically reserved for religious artifacts. Each memorial coin was struck with extra care, examined more thoroughly than normal production pieces, and handled with white gloves to ensure perfect condition. The quality control standards were elevated to levels usually reserved for the most exclusive commemorative pieces. The technical achievement of producing hundreds of thousands of memorial coins while maintaining exceptional quality standards became a testament to British craftsmanship and manufacturing excellence. The Royal Mint's reputation for precision and reliability, built over more than 1,000 years of operation, was being tested under unprecedented circumstances. They passed that test magnificently, delivering coins that exceeded even their own high standards. Media coverage of the memorial coins evolved from simple news reporting to deeper analysis of their artistic and cultural significance. Art historians compared Hobbs' design to great portrait traditions throughout British history. Numismatic experts placed the coins in the context of memorial currency from other nations and eras. Cultural commentators explored what the widespread desire for physical mementos revealed about how people process grief and memory in the digital age. The emotional responses to the memorial coins continued to surprise everyone involved in their creation. Customer service representatives at the Royal Mint found themselves serving as informal grief counselors as people called to share their personal connections to the Queen and explain why owning a memorial coin was so important to them. A widow in Australia called to order a coin for each of her grandchildren, explaining that the Queen had been crowned the same year she was married. A teacher in Kenya requested classroom sets to help her students understand the historical significance of the Queen's role in their country's independence. The economic impact of the memorial coin program was substantial but secondary to its emotional and cultural significance. The Royal Mint typically operated as a commercial enterprise, balancing artistic considerations with profit margins and production efficiency. But the memorial coins were approached differently, with costs and timelines determined by what was needed to create fitting tributes rather than what was most profitable. The success of the memorial coins also highlighted the continuing relevance of physical currency in an increasingly digital world. While most financial transactions were conducted electronically, the desire for tangible connections to important events and people remained strong. The memorial coin served functions that digital alternatives could never fulfill. They could be held, passed down through generations, and displayed in ways that created lasting physical connections to historical moments. International recognition of the memorial coin project came from unexpected sources. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization expressed interest in the coins as examples of how traditional crafts could preserve and transmit cultural memory. Art museums requested examples for their collections of significant contemporary design. Academic institutions incorporated the coins into courses on everything from British history to contemporary art and design. The project's influence extended beyond numismatics into broader discussions about public art and national memory. The challenge of creating a single image that could serve as a fitting memorial for someone as significant as Queen Elizabeth II sparked conversations about how societies choose to remember their important figures. Hobbes' approach, emphasizing dignity and continuity rather than dramatic gesture or innovation, was studied as an example of memorial art that served its purpose without calling attention to itself. Production statistics revealed the scale of public desire for memorial connections to the Queen. By October 2022, the Royal Mint had produced more memorial coins in 6 weeks than they typically produced commemorative pieces in an entire year. The demand showed no signs of decreasing, with backorders extending months into the future. Additional production facilities were brought online, and temporary staff were hired to handle the unprecedented volume. The global distribution network required significant expansion to handle international shipping of memorial coins. Partnerships were established with postal services, private courier companies, and international banks to ensure that coins could reach customers worldwide in acceptable timeframes. Special packaging was developed to protect the coins during international shipping while maintaining the dignity appropriate for memorial items. Quality assurance became a point of particular pride for the Royal Mint during this period. Every memorial coin was individually inspected before packaging, with any piece showing even minor imperfections being melted down and restruck. The standard was perfection, and anything less was considered unworthy of the Queen's memory. This approach was expensive and time-consuming, but it reflected the Mint's commitment to creating memorial pieces that would honor both the Queen and their own reputation for excellence. The cultural impact of the memorial coins extended into unexpected areas. Artists began incorporating them into larger memorial works and installations. Musicians referenced them in songs about the Queen's life and legacy. Writers used them as symbols in poems and essays exploring themes of memory, service, and national identity. The coins became more than just collectibles or keepsakes, they became cultural artifacts that helped people process and express complex emotions about loss, history, and change. Personal stories continued to emerge about what the memorial coins meant to individuals and families. A veteran who had served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles wrote about how the coin reminded him that the Queen had been a constant symbol of hope during Britain's darkest moments. A young mother described using the coin to explain to her children why their great-grandmother was crying when the Queen died. An immigrant to Canada wrote about how receiving his memorial coin made him feel truly welcomed into his new country's history and traditions. The success of the Memorial Coin Project established new precedents for how significant deaths might be commemorated in the future. Other nations studied the Royal Mint's approach, and several began developing their own memorial coin programs for important national figures. The project demonstrated that in an age of digital media and virtual connections, there remained strong desire for physical objects that could serve as focal points for memory and reflection. As 2022 drew to a close, the Memorial Coin Project had become far more successful than anyone had anticipated. What began as a careful preparation for an event everyone hoped would be far in the future had evolved into a celebration of a life well lived and a demonstration of how art, craft, and commerce could combine to serve deeper human needs for connection and memory. 6 months after Queen Elizabeth II's death, the Royal Mint's Memorial Coin Project had evolved from an emergency response to a lasting legacy program. The initial rush of orders had stabilized into steady, sustained demand that showed no signs of diminishing. Christopher Hobbs' portrait of the Queen had become one of the most recognizable and beloved coin designs in modern history, joining the ranks of classic numismatic art that transcended mere currency to become cultural icons. The long-term impact of the memorial coins became apparent in unexpected ways. Museums around the world began acquiring examples for their collections, recognizing them as significant artifacts of early 21st century mourning and memory practices. The British Museum, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Louvre all requested complete sets for their numismatic collections. Art history programs began studying the coins as examples of how traditional portrait techniques could serve contemporary memorial purposes. Educational institutions found innovative uses for the memorial coins. History teachers used them to help students understand the concept of constitutional monarchy and the Queen's role in British and Commonwealth governance. Art classes examined the technical and aesthetic challenges of creating effective portraits at such a small scale. Economics courses explored the coins as examples of how emotional and cultural factors could influence market demand far beyond normal commercial considerations. The Royal Mint established a special archive dedicated to preserving the complete story of the memorial coin project. Documents, photographs, design sketches, and even video recordings of production processes were carefully catalogued and stored. Christopher Hobbs donated his original drawings and reference materials, ensuring that future researchers would be able to understand exactly how the final design was developed and refined. Personal collecting stories continued to emerge, each revealing different aspects of how the memorial coins had touched individual lives. A nurse who had worked throughout the pandemic ordered a memorial coin to commemorate both the Queen's death and her own retirement, feeling that both events marked the end of an era of service and dedication. A grandfather in New Zealand purchased coins for each of his grandchildren, planning to give them on their 18th birthdays along with stories about what the Queen had meant to their family and country. The technical innovations developed for the Memorial Coin Project had lasting effects on the Royal Mint's capabilities. New quality control procedures, improved metal finishing techniques, and enhanced packaging systems developed for the memorial coins were incorporated into regular production processes. The project had pushed the Mint's craftsmen and technology to new levels of excellence that would benefit all future coin production. International recognition of the Memorial Coin Project culminated in several prestigious awards. The World Money Fair, the numismatic industry's most important international gathering, named Hobbs' design as Coin of the Year for 2022. The International Association of Currency Affairs recognized the Royal Mint's handling of the project as a model for how government institutions could respond to significant national events with both speed and dignity. The economic analysis of the Memorial Coin Project revealed fascinating insights into consumer behavior during periods of national mourning. Demand had come from demographic groups that rarely purchased collectible coins, suggesting that the emotional significance of the Queen's death had motivated purchases far beyond traditional numismatic markets. The project had attracted new customers to coin collecting, many of whom continued purchasing other Royal Mint products long after receiving their memorial coins. Christopher Hobbs reflected often on how the project had changed his career and his understanding of his craft. Creating the Queen's final portrait had been the most challenging and rewarding work of his professional life. The knowledge that his design would be seen and treasured by millions of people for generations to come gave every detail of his subsequent work additional meaning and importance. He began accepting speaking engagements at art schools and design conferences, sharing the lessons he had learned about creating art that served both aesthetic and emotional purposes. The memorial coins also sparked broader conversations about the role of monarchy in contemporary society. For many people, especially younger generations who had known no other sovereign, the Queen's death and the memorial coins that followed were their first direct confrontation with the reality of royal mortality and succession. The coins became conversation starters that helped families and communities discuss complex questions about tradition, continuity, and change in modern democratic societies. Research institutions began studying the memorial coin phenomenon as a case study in collective grief and memory-making. Sociologists examined how physical objects helped people process loss and maintain connections to important figures. Psychologists explored the role of tangible mementos in healthy grief processing. Anthropologists compared the memorial coin tradition to similar practices in other cultures and historical periods. The global reach of the memorial coins continued to surprise everyone involved in their creation. Orders came from countries with no historical connection to Britain or the Commonwealth, demonstrating the Queen's status as a truly international figure. A collector in Chile ordered a set because he admired the Queen's dedication to public service. A group of students in Thailand purchased coins to commemorate their study of British constitutional history. A family in Morocco requested coins because the Queen had been featured in their grandmother's stories about watching the coronation on television in 1953. The Royal Mint began planning for the long-term preservation and availability of the memorial coins. Unlike regular circulation currency, which was produced for a specific period and then replaced, the memorial coins were designed to remain available indefinitely. Special arrangements were made to maintain production capabilities and material supplies, ensuring that future generations would be able to obtain authentic examples directly from the mint rather than relying on secondary markets. The project's success also influenced how the Royal Mint approached other commemorative projects. The careful balance between artistic excellence, emotional resonance, and technical precision established new standards for significant commemorative coins. Future projects would be measured against the memorial coin's success in creating pieces that served multiple purposes as artistic objects, historical artifacts, and emotional touchstones. As 2023 progressed, the memorial coins had settled into their permanent place in British cultural history. They were no longer emergency responses to an unexpected event, but established commemorative pieces that would continue serving their memorial purpose for decades to come. Children born after the Queen's death would grow up seeing her portrait on these coins, learning about her life and reign through the small masterpiece that Christopher Hobbs had created in those urgent weeks of preparation and production. The final assessment of the Memorial Coin Project revealed achievements that went far beyond anyone's initial expectations. What began as careful preparation for an event everyone hoped would remain distant had become a masterpiece of responsive design, precision manufacturing, and cultural sensitivity. The coins had helped a grieving world process loss while celebrating a life of unprecedented service. They had demonstrated the continuing power of physical objects to carry emotional and cultural meaning in ways that digital alternatives could not match. Most importantly, the memorial coins had achieved their fundamental purpose. They had created a beautiful, dignified, and lasting tribute to Queen Elizabeth II that would preserve her memory for generations to come. In wallet collections and display cases, in museums and private homes, in Britain and around the world, Christopher Hobbs' portrait of the Queen would continue telling her story long after everyone who had known her personally was gone. The memorial coins had become more than currency, more than collectibles, more than art. They had become vessels for memory, bridges between generations, and testaments to the enduring human need to honor those who had dedicated their lives to serving others. In creating something beautiful to mark the end of the Second Elizabethan Age, the Royal Mint had ensured that the Queen's legacy would continue in the most tangible and lasting way possible, held in the hands of people who would pass her story on to their children, and their children's children, for generations yet to come.